Hey there, Internet friends. Welcome to episode 12 of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host this week, Trevor Starkey, and joining me, we have a one-on-one episode this week. I have Cameron Abbott with me. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on? I'm doing pretty good.
All right, excellent. So we will dive into what we've been up to in just a second, but some quick housekeeping real quick. If you enjoy what you hear, please remember you can always like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast everywhere you can. We're on iTunes, Spotify. Logan said a few others last week, and I can't confirm if we're on Stitcher or some of those other ones that he mentioned. So I hope we are. If we're not and you want us to be there, let me know and I will look into it. But I can confirm iTunes and Spotify. If you're feeling extra generous, you can always support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. We didn't have any new patrons this week, but if you do support us over there, we will welcome you to the patron community with a nice little shout out here in the episode, as we did last week with a couple. They didn't point it out, but last week Bev and Pam Larson joined, and those are my aunt and grandmother, or grandmother and aunt respectively. I basically helped them get a Patreon account set up so that they could support the show. So since I wasn't on the episode last week, I want to give a special shout out to them because they are my family, and I chose to do that. So let us dive right into what is new and nerdy in our lives. So Cameron, what is new and nerdy with you?
There hasn't been a lot going on. We've kind of been the post game of the year cool down. I ended up picking up Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE
Encore.
Encore for
Yeah, I
the
did too.
Switch. I've put about 5 minutes into that because it's sitting on my Switch, and unfortunately, something else happened, which is I watched the entirety of the Witcher Netflix show.
Yeah, how was that?
Loved it.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing about it is the pacing of the last two episodes are weird in the way that it's all of a sudden meant to be like a thread closing conclusion to the season, which is weird because the rest of the season doesn't act like it has a lot of threads to close, and so you have the invasion of Nilfgaard comes to a head, the story of Ciri and Geralt comes to a head, and it is it's really good. Loved the series. But it also got me to start playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt because it was like $15 on PSN.
Nice. Yeah. The series, I think the series as it goes has kind of its three main threads of, Geralt's thread, Yennefer's thread, and Ciri's thread. And to what you're talking about, I think it hurts the last couple episodes that Yennefer and Geralt's threads meet up and start intertwining halfway through the season, because up until that point they're all existing in three very different timelines. And so by the time you get to those last couple episodes, you're basically just now dovetailing the two remaining threads. Ciri, who's been, out in the wilderness since the first episode, and Geralt and Yennefer, who are now finally caught up to Ciri's timeline, basically, in those last couple episodes. And I didn't anticipate the battle being as big of a thing it was, but then I'm like, oh, but they are trying to kind of pitch this as the new Game of Thrones kind of thing. So you got to have big, fantastic, epic fights, I guess, as a result. And I thought at least the seeds had been appropriately planted throughout the season to lead up to that being the culmination of season one. Yeah. Before we dive into the game, which you've hopped into, what'd you think of the show?
I think Henry Cavill's phenomenal.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun.
He is. And I'll say this: I was not a fan of Geralt before this. I thought that the character was way too much of and I'm very wrong about this, but very much of too much of a Mary Sue. I didn't understand why this very boring character was beloved by anybody, and why anybody, why are the most gorgeous women of the world wanna sleep with him, and like this, he's so well respected and so popular, and I was like, I just don't understand it. And a part of it was like I just didn't grasp his character because my introduction to his character was The Witcher, which is a game that starts off with him losing his memories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so hurting to Geralt's character, because in the first Witcher game, I never played the second one, but in the first Witcher game, he comes off as like this selfless hero, and like it just doesn't vibe well. Like it just doesn't vibe with like what they tell you the Witchers are. It doesn't do any of that. In the show, that was the reason for that, is that's a game storyline stuff only.
Yeah.
In the books and the show, Geralt's character is very much a very interesting character. And I did not realize that until I started, watching the show, and I realized Geralt's one of the, like, he's the archetype that is one of my favorite archetypes in all of literature and fiction, which is a man who does good, because if he doesn't do it, nobody will. It's very much the same kind of like character traits that I really like about Connor from Assassin's Creed 3.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who is not well looked upon by the majority of fans of that franchise, but there's an amazing scene where, and I'm going to spoil this and I don't care because the game came out a decade ago, but there's a scene where he has been chasing Charles Lee through a shipyard, and they start a fire while they're fighting, and then they fall through the floor, and Connor's in a he lands on like a broken pole, and his side has been pierced, and he's struggling to pull himself off of it, and Charles Lee swaggers over and is just like in just such exasperation, and he says he talks about how you're everything you've done has been everything you assassins do is pointless, and then he gets more pointed and he says the people who you fought alongside and fought for their freedom basically don't care about you. They betrayed you. Washington betrayed you. The men that you look to for guidance have turned their backs on you. This has not gone your way. You murdered your father. All this stuff, and it's and it hasn't done anything. We are going to keep coming forward. We're gonna the Templars will continue on. You can't stop this. Why do you even struggle? Why do you even bother? And he just says in the most pointed moment, in just such a really great moment of performance for the voice actor especially, he says, because no one else will. And that's the entire focus of Connor's character, is he takes these steps and he does these things because if he doesn't, nobody else will. And I love characters like that. I love characters who are driven by that. It's not they think that they're the good guy. It's not that they think that this will lead to a better world. They just know that it's the right thing to do, and two, if they don't do it, nobody else will. The world is so messed up, and the world, especially in the world of The Witcher, the world is so messed up, and people are so selfish, so selfish, and they're obsessed with only what matters to them. And it's not that Geralt is noble, it's that he is he's noble in the sense of he is a good person, but he's a good person who knows he's playing in a world, and he's in a world where good things don't happen to good people, and he sees it all the time. That's part of his job, is that he sees good people who are just trying to make a living, just trying to eke by, and they are looked down on, they're spat upon, they're killed by monsters indiscriminately, they're victims of war and disease and pestilence and just awful things happening to these people, and he just watches it. And so even though he has to take money because otherwise he can't live, you can tell that if he could, he wouldn't take money from anybody to do what he does, but he has to, and it grates on him. You can see that it grates on him, that you can see he doesn't like his situation. He's a mutant. He's not part of humanity. And I love this idea of this character who, everybody just takes dumps on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he just goes through it willingly. Like, he knows it's not going to work out with Yennefer, but he loves her. And he wants to make something work with her. And so he does what he does because it was the thing that he had to do at the moment. He's not some Machiavellian protagonist whose plans are infallible. He's not some do-gooder who can do no wrong. Like, he makes the wrong choices for the right reasons a lot. And I love that about his character. And I've really fallen in love with this character of Geralt. And I love that Henry Cavill is able to do it so well. Just so well. Also, it's super weird that his hair is white and gray. Like, his hair is gray from, like, being, like, witcherified, but his chest hair has not been. And the contrast between the gray hair and, like, the deep, thick, dark, curly, like, matted, like, chest hair is fascinating to me. On a level that I was like, this is just so interesting that they didn't shave him, didn't wax him, just let that natural hair be there. And then just kept the wig on him. And it's like, that's a bold choice, and I respect it. I respect that you're challenging the conventions of what I should expect out of my fantasy, and you're giving me a hairy man with contradictory hair color, and you know what? I'm here for it. Also, sometimes his eyes look weird, but sometimes they look like they're the coolest thing in the world. Yeah. Also, Yennefer, I never can stop seeing her as a hunchback.
That's
that
actress
is so good. That actress is so good.
Yeah, I went into the show having played 50 to 100 hours of Witcher 3 back when it came out. And
that game really is this long.
I mean, and like, I didn't even get that far in the game. Like, I got distracted doing all sorts of side quests and all that stuff. Because there is a ton of stuff to do in that game. And like, some of the side quests are some of like the best content in that game.
Oh my gosh. I just got evicted a godling out of a house.
Okay.
And that's part of the main story quest. And I was just like, this morning I was like, okay, I'm going to get up early. I'm already up early. I'm just going to do this one mission and then be done. Mm-hmm. And Trevor, I completed no less than like half a dozen to like 6 to 10 side quests before I even finished this. Like, I'm like, this game has so much content.
Yep.
And it's compelling.
Yeah.
It's so good.
So I went into The Witcher 3 with like no context prior to that. Like, and they do a good enough job kind of saying like, here's who Geralt is, here's what happened in the previous game, so you can, you get up to speed on that. And there's some nice little cinematics kind of to set the stage for what the Wild Hunt is and all that stuff. But I still didn't like really have a good, strong connection to the characters. So coming into the show, I had that basically percolating in my mind. And the show, I think, does such a great job of like introducing those characters and who they are and where they are in their lives. And yeah, like, I didn't know any of Yennefer's like backstory from Witcher 3. I hadn't like picked up on any of that. So like, when she's introduced in this, I was like, oh, that's a different take on Yennefer. I wonder what's going to happen there. And then you see her story play out, especially and the transformation she undergoes in the first few episodes. And I was like, wow, that was really cool. And I really liked how they did that, and what now her motivation is for kind of the storyline of Yennefer I was aware of like her wanting to protect Ciri and Geralt and stuff in Witcher 3. So like, I appreciated that not only did it give me good backstory on like the characters and who they are and kind of the stuff they were facing, because Ciri was another one, like, in playing The Witcher, Witcher 3, like, my interactions with Ciri had largely been like in flashbacks to like, because most of that game you play is Geralt, but you occasionally hop into flashbacks to see what Ciri's up to, and you're, as Geralt, you're constantly trying to track down Yennefer and Ciri kind of stuff, and I didn't know like what the relationship was there outside of like, oh, he's kind of a foster dad for whatever. So I thought that the series does such a great job of establishing what that relationship is and what the dynamic is and where they come from.
That moment where he's like, well, I'll do as you did. I'll take the law of surprise. And
yeah.
Then, and he just that look and just that singular auditory F-bomb, just like, so good.
Yeah.
So good.
so the series already does like a great job kind of introducing all that for me, and like you made me really want to hop in and play through The Witcher again, or in my case again for you for the first time, and basically I want to give it more of a shot this time because I felt like I probably bounced away from The Witcher last time because A, other things were coming out, and B, I wasn't as invested in the characters or the like lore of that world. And the other thing that I think this series does really well is it explained and defined the lore of the world for me in a way that was more or less unclear when I was playing the game. Like, the game is like, oh, war has just come through these lands. And so seeing a lot of that war come through the lands in the series, I was like, okay, now I have a better understanding of like the power dynamics in this world. So I now feel more invested in the world, the characters, the lore going into the game this time. So yeah, that's been fun. I have not had much time to play it. I'm still in like the White Flower prologue area, I think. I think it's White Flowers. Like I'm still replaying through that whole section of the game. I just did the quest. I don't know, like when I hopped in finally last night for a little bit, where you like there's the girl who got murdered and basically thrown down a well and left or created a like
a noon wraith.
A noon wraith. Yeah, thank you.
The lady in white. No, that's a different one, but still, it's the same thing.
But yeah, so like I remembered playing through that the first time around, but like even knowing like I didn't grasp that like how the evil creatures were created really the first time around, but like getting kind of the backstory of how Strigas are created in this and getting that whole episode where Geralt kind of has to try and fight the Striga and like save its soul basically, gave me a newfound appreciation going back into the game. And so like when I came upon that quest, which I remembered from the first time around, I remember it being like tragic, and it's another like little side quest, but they put so much like care into like the history of what happened to like cause this to be a thing that like even for that little 10 minutes of stuff, it's a compelling story, and you feel bad for this girl who got untimely murdered and whatnot. And I think I think it was teased that there's like I can go talk to another character and find a little bit more about her and her beloved or whatever. But just like experiencing that, have you gotten to the Bloody Baron storyline yet?
Yes, I completed it.
Yeah, so that was the standout obviously for me from the first, and you see more or less a version of that in the Striga story in the show. So it was like I remember the Bloody Baron being like, wow, like this sets a new standard for what side quests in video games should be. Like I remember that more than I remember the main story of what I'd gotten up through to that point in the game. But
to be fair, the Bloody Baron is like you have to go through the Bloody Baron stuff to get to like to find out more about Ciri. So I don't know if it's so much as people are like, oh, that's a side quest. It's like kind of like technically maybe, but you also have to go through it to get through the main quest. So it bleeds in and out of it. But I think the finale you don't have to.
Yeah. I was like you have to like initiate it and you have to get introduced to those characters, but I think you can basically at that point bounce away and not like see it through to its conclusion if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was compelling enough and had such evocative imagery and just ideas behind it that I was like, oh no, I definitely want to see how this plays out. And so I think very much the Striga and Full Test episode that you have in The Witcher is it not like inspired by, because they're they existed simultaneously or separately anyway, but I think like that's like a lot of the same ideas behind that Bloody Baron story.
So like, the Striga story is straight from the books.
Yeah.
And it's actually the intro to The Witcher 1. The movie introduction is literally that storyline. To kind of introduce, like, the Striga storyline is literally, like, The Witcher 101 for understanding, like, what Witchers do and how they work, and it's used a lot in introducing it in a lot of different media.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the Striga storyline is, like, I think from, like, one of the first books. So but you can tell like the Bloody Baron was like deeply inspired by that with its use of like dead babies, I guess is the best way to put it. The dead baby, like there's a lot of dead baby stuff in The Witcher, just like there's a lot of other stuff in The Witcher because The Witcher has everything in it. Also, I found out that like this game takes place after the last book that Geralt's in, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is weird too, because the way that book ends is kind of like Geralt's dead, and so is Yennefer. Because they like it's so cool. This is I don't think they'll ever get this will be like season 10 of The Witcher if they do it, but the show might end at this point too. Is in the last book that Geralt shows up in canonically. Apparently happens, and I found this out today while doing the dreaming, like finishing the dream quest line for the main storyline is, it turns out that, so Ciri can leap through time and space, which is something that is interesting. You know that immediately if you've played any of the game, because you see her do it. But, she apparently takes them to Avalon, like from King Arthur's mythology. And like it's interesting like how that plays out and what that point is, but it's kind of saying like Geralt is dead. It's interesting. I'm super curious to see where things kind of go from here, but I'm maybe 30-ish hours 40, maybe closing in on 40 hours, and I have completed almost everything of Valen.
Okay.
Because I literally am a massive lover of question marks on maps.
Yep,
and going to them.
That was my problem. I was as well, and so it sucked me away from everything in that first game or in my first playthrough.
Yeah. In the main storyline, you're supposed to be at where I'm at. You're supposed to be like level 8. I'm closing in on level 16.
Yeah.
It's very much like this is very much like a thing that I'm deeply, deeply in love with now, which is crazy because if you had told me in 2019, hey Cameron, you're gonna want to play The Witcher 3, I'd tell you, no way, loser. Those Witcher games are for nerds.
Mm-hmm.
Says the man whose favorite game is Tetris.
Nerd.
But yeah, no, that's basically been my life outside of work.
Nice. Yeah, it's I love that, and I mean obviously that was a very common refrain given that like The Witcher 3 reached a all-time high Steam concurrent players peak after the series came out. Also, of course, we have to talk about Toss a Coin to Your Witcher and the banger that is that song.
Oh, and Dandelion's awesome, by the way, in the show. He's so cool. I love him.
Yeah. Or because he's Yasker in the he got renamed in the show as Yaskier.
So it's actually interesting. Yaskier is his original name from the Polish version of the books.
Uh-huh.
But Yaskier translates to Buttercup, which in the American translation, when they were translated in English, they thought sounded too feminine, so they changed it to Dandelion.
Yeah.
That's such a fascinating thing. Like, so in the show, they decided to honor his original name in Polish, Jaskier.
But yeah, he like his relationship and dynamic with Geralt is crazy. Like it definitely makes me question like how aging and stuff exists in that timeline, because based on like when we first meet him to like when we last see him in the show, it feels like he should have aged like 30 or 40 years or something like that, but he has not clearly. Whereas like Yennefer and Geralt get a pass on a lot of that stuff because of
magic.
The magic around their lives. But
magic for Yennefer, and then like chemical alterations, like alchemy and mutation stuff to Geralt.
Yeah,
which is cool because I did a side quest where I found another Witcher, and he talks about a reason why he like spared this young girl, and he's like, "Here, she reminds me of my sister before I got taken to become a Witcher." And you can ask like, "What happened to your sister?" And he said she died, and you're like, "Oh," and he goes, "Of old age," and it's like, "Oh shoot."
Yeah.
Witchers can't have normal relationships with regular people because they die.
Yeah, and you get that in like in the sex position scene in like episode 3 or 4 in The Witcher, where Geralt's with the prostitute basically, and she's like, "Oh, don't you remember their names?" And the girl's name or whatever. And he's like, "There have been so many, I don't remember any of their names," kind of thing. And it is like it hits on that like, oh yeah, he's like what the as the Butcher of Blaviken at that point, he's, that happened like 50 years earlier, something. Like, I don't know the timeline nearly as well as I could, or I could find it and look up, but like significant amount of time has passed, and when you put that in the context of like a normal human lifespan, it's like, oh yeah, that's right, that like it is that kind of like the notion of growing old with someone is not what witchers or witches or mages in this world like get to experience. So, which makes, I think, like the connection between Yennefer and Geralt, it adds another layer to their relationship. But yeah, very cool. I'm glad to hear you're hopping into that, and I am as well, and I look forward to, like, especially with all the other games getting delayed for a few months.
Yeah,
like,
no, that's true.
My plan was basically like, oh, I can play The Witcher in the first month and a half or whatever until Final Fantasy comes out or whatever, and then I can dive into that. And now I've got like until May, before, or I guess until April before some of that stuff comes out. I'll take a quick detour, as I'm sure you will, for like the Kingdom Hearts 3 DLC here in a week or so.
But there's that, and then there's also Doom Eternal's coming out, which I'm super stoked for.
Very true.
As somebody who really, really loved the first game.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. So I will dive into a couple of things. So I haven't, like I said, I played a little bit of The Witcher in the aftermath of the series and really enjoying it. Oh, and we started to talk about it, so I want to swing back to Toss a Coin to Your Witcher. Love that song. Love various iterations I've seen of that song. It is like, I'll just randomly like throw it on YouTube or something just to like listen to it. I caught last night Mega Ran released a his take on it with a couple other rappers. That's like in typical Mega Ran fashion, going through like the lore of the games, the story, all that stuff. With Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, O'Valley Plenty as like the hook. Definitely worth checking out if you are able. But yeah, that's just like that. That was a really good use of like music and that character to basically say, hey, I'm gonna basically act as your PR guy, and we're gonna like change like public opinion of you. People are scared of you. You're the Butcher of Blaviken, but we're gonna make people know that you're trying to do things for a greater good, or at least for money. So I love kind of that take on it, and he goes from getting like food thrown at him in our introduction to him to like an episode later, people are singing that song along with him in the pubs and whatnot. And I thought it was a nice little payoff. And one of the things that this reminded me, like they use music in like a lot of the end credits stuff for the series, and it started getting me to hate that Netflix will just autoplay into the next episode, because I was like, 100%. Wait, I want to, like, because there's one after the I want to say it's after I think it's after the Jin episode, where like it's basically a reprise of Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, but it's now singing about Yennefer and kind of her life and her powers and her sway over Geralt, maybe. And it plays over the end credits, and like the first couple times I heard it, it was just like you hear of a line or two, and then it cuts into the next episode. And so it wasn't until like rewatching it, I had to say like, no, I want to like continue watching. Let me watch the credits and listen to this song. And I was like,
because it's all Dandelion's ballads that they talk about in the game. They're like, the ballads of you and Yennefer, your sorceress, and it's like, yes, okay, I want to hear these. And not only that, but the guy who plays Dandelion has a fantastic voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, definitely try and not skip those end credits if you were watching through The Witcher, so you can enjoy those wonderful songs. But on top of that, so yeah, I spent most of the last couple weeks since I've been on the show editing and writing and doing a whole bunch of stuff for all of our Game of the Year posts that we had on That Nerdy Site over the last couple of weeks, and the movies of the year, and all of the best of the decades lists that everybody put together. Basically, I had eyes on pretty much all of those, so everybody wrote them, and then I kind of was going through and editing, spending my nights in editing and getting everything ready for publish the next days. And so that was basically like a second full-time job after my new full-time job, and so the combination of those two things for the last couple weeks has kept me from getting to put a ton of time into games. I did, like you said, I picked up Tokyo Mirage Sessions on Switch because that was it's one of the last like Wii U games that I was like, oh, I wanted to play that. I heard good things about it, but I loaded it up and I was like, okay. I loaded it up yesterday morning, and I had just watched the latest episodes of My Hero Academia, and I was like, okay, I just did a lot of like reading and anime stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and like come back to this
Yeah,
a little bit later.
sure.
And then yeah, Witcher I've been kind of hopping into here and there, but I'm still very early in a replay through of that. And so the other things I kind of want to talk about and highlight are a couple movies I've seen recently. The first of which is 1917. It was I wish it had come out last year because it would have been, at the top of my list for best of 2019 movies. But it was only in like limited release last year, so it didn't come out here until like a week or so ago. And I basically saw it first night I could, and I'm a sucker for like the one shot look of a thing. So like in God of War, my favorite game of all time, like it's in there, and that's a prominent feature of that game, and I love what it does for that game. And then like Birdman from a few years back is another great example of like making a thing look like it's being done in one take. And yeah, you can like have fun kind of diving into all of the like where are the hidden cuts and all that stuff, but it's also fun to just like let the movie magic wash over you and go on this journey with these characters for a couple hours. And so when I first saw the trailers for 1917, I didn't know it was going to be that kind of movie. It wasn't until people started talking about it and kind of revealing that it was filmed to look like it is all one continuous shot that I was like, oh, okay, now I'm invested, now I am in. And I went and saw it, and I was blown away. Not only is it like just a good, compelling like war story, but because you're following these characters in this like continuous sequence, and you have a very limited scope to into their lives, not even always seeing what they're seeing because of like where the camera is positioned and stuff. It's wartime. The premise of the movie is basically these two soldiers have been commissioned to get a message across enemy lines to stop a battle in the morning, to stop an attack in the morning because they're walking into a trap. And so yeah, they have to get there by morning to stop the attack, or 1,600 men will die because they're going to just get slaughtered. And they're walking through enemy territory that they've been told has been like cleared out, but has it really?
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. And there's still going to be hurdles and obstacles in that way. And so with that in mind, like the whole movie is like tense, but also incredibly beautifully shot. There are some of my like some very haunting and beautiful imagery that I don't want to like go into too much detail about because it could maybe constitute spoilers and stuff. But there's some, just especially in the latter half of the movie, I will say there's some kind of establishing like views and vistas that the camera turns and you see for these characters kind of experiencing that are just like mind-blowingly beautiful and haunting and stuff, and like will stick with me. I love, one of the things I love about this movie, and I will shout out, Logan has already written kind of our review on it, and I was so mad at him that he called dibs on this one, because like I had been wanting to just sit down and write about it, but he'd already kind of called it, so I was sitting there waiting for his review to come through for the last week or so. And he appropriately gives it the same phenomenal 10 out of 10 score that I would have given it. And it was interesting seeing kind of what really resonated with him as well as and comparing that to what resonated with me. But you can go check out his review on thatnerdysite.com. It's a very well written little piece. But yeah, one of the things I love about the movie is that it has as like the general characters, the like generals and commanders and whatnot that the soldiers encounter throughout the film, like it has here, like the big name stars like Colin Firth or Benedict Cumberbatch or
Yeah, I was wondering how they fit into this film because I know they're
Mark
in it.
Strong even. And they just kind of like they're in and out. They are very much like supporting roles that if this were a different kind of movie, they would be the leads of their respective movies, and you can get from like their couple minutes on screen as like the main focal characters that you follow kind of interact with them, get their orders and bounce, or interact with them in whatever capacity they're interacting with them. Like you could very easily see, and it would have been like 1917 is already like a masterclass in itself of filmmaking, but it would be like even more mind blowing if Sam Mendes had been like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do this 1917 one, but then I'm also gonna do a spin-off movie following the Colin Firth character and what he does during this 2 hour span of time or whatever, and what Mark Strong is doing during this span of time, and you could envision this like cross universe where like these characters are all like interacting with each other in their respective stories, but then also going off and having their own, wild adventures. And so what I love is that like by casting these like well-known people as like the people of power in this universe, it instinctively as an audience, you think, okay, yeah, those people are famous within their position in the military here. So the grunts that you kind of follow in this, the corporals, who are a couple more or less unknown actors by design, like they're somebody that you would immediately look up to and think are going to be a much more prominent role, but they are like, this is not their story. Their story would be a different movie, and could be just as compelling a movie, but this is not what their story is. So I love that they are kind of in there to add heightened gravitas to the characters that they're playing and the power positions of those characters in relationship to our unknown leads. And yeah, they all shine in their few minutes on screen, but it's very much not their movie. They are glorified cameos, supporting roles in this film to help, I think, really flesh out that dynamic. So yeah, it's a really powerful. I highly recommend definitely checking it out. It is, suspenseful, intense because you don't know what's around the corner for these two soldiers, and sometimes sometimes what's around the corner is like a beautiful vista, and other times it is, a surprise attack or something like that they were not anticipating, and so the constant tension of what's around the corner helps really like flesh out this. And then the whole one-shot dynamic of the film is just Roger Deakins showing off at this point. There are some shots in particular where I was just like, oh, fuck you, Roger Deakins. Because they in the mindscape of like knowing what they're doing in a scene, it's like there's no way a physical person could have made that movement in the way that you've made that movement without some kind of like crazy trickery, and so there's crazy trickery, and there's been already some like wonderful behind the scenes like videos and stuff released. There was one I saw on like the One Perfect Shot Twitter account, because there's going to be a ton of one perfect shots from this movie that will show up on that Twitter account over the coming year. But like the way they film a lot of those like extended 8 or 9 minute takes by taking camera off a truck dolly into like a handheld thing and then onto a crane or something like that. It's just like vastly impressive, the amount of work that they put into kind of really mapping out this whole trajectory of the story and then filming it to and seeing the final product. I'm very excited to, much like I think I said this with Spider-Verse, on Twitter, but like much like with Spider-Verse, this is a movie I'm going to try and like seek out as much of like that cool behind the scenes footage as I can to see how the movie was made, because in the end product it is so seamless, but there's so much like going on behind the scenes. It's like one of my biggest Academy Award snubs is that it didn't get nominated for Best Editing, because the whole point of the editing in this movie is that you don't know it's there, and they nail that like flawlessly. So it should have gotten some recognition for that. But I'm I'm relieved in that it will almost certainly win at least best cinematography, if not best picture, because it was just really, really good, and I definitely recommend. So yeah, that was 1917. And then the other movie that I got to see last week was I got to see an early screening at the Alamo Drafthouse here in Tempe, of The Gentleman, the new Guy Ritchie movie that's coming out. And I am not a like notable Guy Ritchie fan. Like, I was thinking about it as I was sitting there waiting for the movie to start, because it was going to be a movie and then like a live streamed Q&A with Guy Ritchie and some of the actors and stuff. And I was like, what Guy Ritchie movies have I seen? And I could basically pin it to Aladdin from last year, and then like the Sherlock Holmes movies. I feel like that is the extent of my Guy Ritchie knowledge. I've not seen, his iconic Snatch or Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and some of that other stuff. And I now need to go and watch some of those, because The Gentleman is just a really fun action, like mystery type of movie, told in a really engaging way with a lot of just incredible performances, a lot of great character actors out there. The framework of the film sees kind of Hugh Grant as this sleazy, like, private detective slash investigative reporter who has been like following this story for some time, and he kind of meets up with like the henchman of Matthew McConaughey's character, who's kind of like an underground weed mob boss in England. And Hugh Grant's character is meeting up with Charlie Hunman to tell him like the story that he's been following. And Charlie Hunman's character is Hunnam's character, is basically Matthew McConaughey's like heavy, his number two, his right hand man. And so he's giving, like, Hugh Grant is giving him a professional courtesy of like, hey, I've been following this story because like the newspapers want to run it and really mess up your guys' day, but I'm being a good guy and I'm giving you guys the heads up, for a fee that I hope you'll meet and honor. And the way he tells the story is just like, Hugh Grant is phenomenally fun in this. He's like a slimy little sleazy kind of guy, but he also like excels and relishes playing the sometimes unreliable narrator here, where sometimes you'll see a scene play out and then they'll be like, that's not how it happened. He's like, I know, I'm just trying to draw dramatic effect or something like that. And it's a lot of fun, because you never know really when that's going to like turn on or off. And so it kind of like adds to that like layer of the story. And overall, it's basically like Matthew McConaughey's character, Mickey Pearson, is looking at maybe getting out of the game, and he's got like basically somebody who's interested in coming in and buying like his operation out from him. And there's all sorts of like power dynamics, because there's two people who are vying for it. This brash up and comer, played by Henry Golding, of like Crazy Rich Asians, who's getting to play a fun against type character in this. You have Jeremy Strong as kind of like businessman who's trying to buy the thing, but also using maybe like some conniving kind of ways to do it. Colin Farrell plays like a completely unrelated to any of that stuff character, but he gets like wrapped up into the life, thanks to some of his young proteges kind of get him pulled into it, and he has a ton of fun in it. Like, I remember like Mickey Pearson. So Matthew McConaughey's character, Hugh Grant's character, and Colin Farrell's character are the ones that like really jumped out at me as like they're all phenomenal. Everybody's really good, but like they were on another level of engaging, charismatic, and just like having a ton of fun in their respective roles. And yeah, I had a really good time seeing this film. I'll try and get like a formal review up on it on the site. I went in having really only seen the trailers and did not expect it to be as funny as it is. And a lot of the humor comes from the writing and the dialogue. A lot of it comes from the editing too, though, where it'll just be like something will happen and they'll smash cut away to another character like reacting to hearing about what happened, and it just leads to some of the like the funniest moments I've had in a theater in the last 6 months or something like that. So that is another one I definitely highly recommend people checking out, especially if you are a fan of Guy Ritchie films. As I understand it, this is in the vein of Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. So if you like those, definitely go and check this one out. But if you also just want like a fun British crime comedy heist drama-y thing, check it out for all of those aspects as well. Any questions or anything I can kind of help shed a light on, Cameron?
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't seen either of these films yet, which is why I've been so quiet.
Yeah.
My apologies to people
No,
who are normally used to me being far more verbose.
It was me realizing, I've talked like a lot for the last 10 minutes about these two movies, and I was also going at a clip that I might not have given you room to interject and ask questions or anything about them. So anything I can clarify, or do you have any just questions about either of the movies I can maybe answer?
I've been enraptured. I'm
Excellent.
very excited to see both these films. I am a Guy Ritchie fan in so much as I loved Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Barrel. I love the Guy Ritchie direction of... I think he's one of the best directors when it comes to momentum and locomotion of a scene.
Yeah, and that they talked about that in the live stream Q&A about like how does he kind of capture that, and he talked about very much that he's constantly trying to keep it quick paced and really fill out the rhythm of a scene, and they made mention. Some of the actors kind of lamented that like they spent all this time like learning the script, and then they would show up to like shoot a scene, and Guy would say, "All right, take the script, fuck the script. We're gonna take the spirit of the script, but the line isn't working, the dialogue isn't working, so we're gonna like switch it out and try and come up with like a quicker pace approach to the dialogue and all that stuff."
He hates anything that takes too long to sit in a scene.
Yeah,
and I think a big criticism towards his directing style that I don't think is necessarily warranted is too many people claim that he just uses the same scene, which is his chase scenes, and it's basically the same every time. And it's not necessarily, in my opinion, in the way that I kind of look at his directing and what I expect out of a Guy Ritchie film is I don't expect the chase scene to be the same every time. I expect the chase scene to have strong motivations for why it's occurring, and then I like to see what happens during the chase scene. It's not so much as will he catch him or will he not catch them. He rarely does the chase scene in a Guy Ritchie film end with the person getting caught. That's usually not how it works. And it's fantastic, or it does, and it leads to like some crazy thing happening at the end of it. And I love those moments because those moments are transitionary. You see that when I say locomotion, I really mean that feeling of movement through a film. And I feel like he does that with dialogue. I feel like he does that with action sequences. He does that with even in scenes where people are like sitting down and talking. There's a feeling of momentum and locomotion going with it. And I think you nailed it with that's what he looks for. And I love that about his films. I don't want Guy Ritchie directing like every film known to man. One Sherlock Holmes film was definitely enough. But I did enjoy I enjoy the commotion of his locomotion, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no. One of the most interesting questions that came out of the live stream Q&A was the interviewer basically asked Matthew McConaughey what it was like working with Guy Ritchie, and Matthew McConaughey talked about kind of like how he has his isms and his verbal tics that kind of are I think people would mostly recognize that he kind of has a little bit more of a drawl, and he can be a little bit slower paced, and he'll have his and ums and that kind of stuff that he uses to flesh out a character, and like he basically talks about how all of that was gone in working with Guy. Like he had to pull all of that stuff out of the performance, because it would have gone against what Guy is really looking for in driving this character and showing this character as a very deliberate, like everything he's saying is deliberate. He knows what he wants and how to get what he wants out of what he's saying, and so not having a lot of those little like things that can otherwise serve as filler or kind of draw out a moment or a beat, pulling all that aside. And that was one of the things, like, Matthew McConaughey was very excited to really get to dive in to do that for this character. So
I love that cool as well, because I've always found that Matthew McConaughey's best moments are when it's funny that I say this, because it can sound insulting, but it's not meant to be insulting, which is some of Matthew McConaughey's best moments are when he's not talking, or when he's talking very little. Mm-hmm. In films or television. Like, nowhere is that better displayed than in True Detective, where the thing that defines his character in True Detective is not in his grandiose speeches that he makes. It's not in his long diatribes. It's in his quiet moments when he is in conversation with somebody and he has a lot of these ums and uhs and these long drawls out and this lengthening the conversation out, because it's very much a amazing way that Matthew McConaughey is able to show that his characters are actually thinking. They're not actually just like, he's not reading something off of a page. There is thought behind it. There is a process of his character. And so I'm excited to see in The Gentleman, where Guy Ritchie doesn't have any of that in his films. And I'm excited to see Matthew McConaughey be... I like in the trailer you can already tell his character's an impulsive character. And I'm excited to see an actual impulsive Matthew McConaughey, because I don't feel like he's ever really done that before. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to see that.
Yeah. I look very much forward to talking with you after you've seen the film, especially as you are more of a Guy Ritchie fan than I am. I look forward to us. We definitely need to grab a Portillo's Day here in the next couple weeks and catch up about that kind of stuff. So
for sure.
Very cool. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode, because, those are the couple things I had, and you had kind of the Witcher rundown of everything we've been going on. So that's going to wrap up this week. Thank you again, Cameron, for joining me. Anything you want to shout out? You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot, 2 B's, 2 T's.
I don't really have much else going on right now. I'm kind of in a lull in the post Game of the Year session stuff. But what I will say is I did pick up Shovel Knight and Knights of the Old Republic from Boss Fight Books. I'm making my way through Knights of the Old Republic right now. As per usual, Boss Fight Books puts out incredible books about video games by writers who usually didn't work with the project, but where the game has actually been a touchstone and sometimes a foundational point of their life. Mm-hmm. And it's very good to see. Knights of the Old Republic is interesting because it's reading much more like a it's very clear that when the person who wrote this book had a lot of access to the people behind the game in a way that is very unusual, at least in my experience of boss fight books. I haven't read as many as I think a lot of other people have, but because you're getting a lot of testimonial stuff rather than inquisitive questions being answered with conjecture, or where it's emotionally driven by the writer's experience. I think I put out a review of Kingdom Hearts 2 by Alexa Ray Correa, who writes very, very passionately about that game and talks about it from a very much a lens of passion. And it's very interesting to see the scope, and I think it's a wonderful thing that they get different kinds of authors to write these books. Yeah. I highly recommend any book. If a game interests you and you see there's a boss fight books for it, buy that book. It's worth the money every time.
Yeah, I picked up I'm looking at on my shelf. I've got 14 of them over there. I've not actually sat down and read any of them, but I love the concept behind them, and it's when I was I picked them up, and it was basically whatever had come out at the time that I ordered these, including Alexa Reyes is in there. and it was like, oh, I need to get back into reading, and I very much still need to get back into reading and sit down with a lot of those, because like so many of them are games that I have, deep personal connections to as well, and so I want to see a lot of those other stories told, or just like Derek, you wrote the Spelunky one as the guy who made Spelunky, and while I don't have like a deep connection to that game, I'm still very fascinated to see what he wanted to write about it, and so yeah, definitely Boss
There
Fight
needs
books,
to be a Stardew
well worth
Valley
checking
one.
out.
I need a Stardew Valley one.
Yeah. Very cool. I will. So you can follow me at Trevor J Starkey. In addition to all of our year-end game of the year, movie of the year, best of the 2019, best of the decade, all that stuff that you can find on thatnerdysite.com for the last couple weeks. I will also shout out tomorrow, as this goes live. Cameron and I have an episode of that D Plus show going up for Darby O'Gill and the Little People. So go check that out if you are so inclined. And yeah. If you liked what you heard, please rate, review, like, subscribe, maybe even consider supporting us over at Patreon, patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can follow everything we're up to at thatnerdysite on Twitter, or check out thatnerdysite.com for all of our latest content. And yeah, that's going to do it. Thank you again for listening. Thank you again, Cameron, for joining me. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.